Okay, so now we're going to get into the first part of the cardiovascular system. For this one, we're going to focus on circulation, the blood, and the heart, and then we'll get into things like homeostatic mechanisms like blood pressure and whatnot next time. Let's go ahead and get in. We're going to talk about the major pathways in the cardiovascular system. We're also going to get into the lymphatic system a bit, make a brief introduction of that, talk about the functions of it and lymphatic vessels, how these two systems, cardiovascular and lymphatic, are kind of linked. We'll talk about lymphatic organs and then talk about how the formed elements are produced in the bone marrow. So when we talk about circulation, right, we're talking about moving things. It's all transport. We're talking about moving things around. And that's one of the main things with circulation is transportation. Moving things like gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide around, moving nutrients around, and waste on top of that as well. We're also, though, providing regulation. So we can have hormones that are transported around for regulating body systems or organs. We also are going to distribute body heat. So temperature control is part of this as well. And then lastly, protection, both against physical harm, so like clotting, right, against the loss of blood, and immunity, some pathogenic protection as well. And so again, when it comes to circulation, there's two main routes. There's the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. The cardiovascular system is involved in transporting blood, and it's a two-way system, meaning we're going all the way around. We're cycling around from, we're leaving the heart, making our way all the way around, and then making our way back to the heart. So it's circular. And so we have the heart, right, which is acting as our pump, and the blood vessels, which act as our channels to move things. And we'll get into the different blood vessels in a little bit. The lymphatic system transports lymph or lymphatic fluid, and this is one way. We're basically pulling up fluid from the tissues and then moving it and dumping it back into the cardiovascular system. So we don't ever make our way around entirely in that cycle with the lymphatic system. It's a one-way road that has a beginning and a clear end, right? So that's the difference, is that the cardiovascular system is circular with the blood flow, and the lymphatic system is just a beginning and an end, and there's no cycling back like that. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the lymphatic system. So some of the main things are transportation and immunity, as well as the absorption of fats. So we are going to pull up extra fluids from between the tissues, between cells. When blood circulates, when we get to the capillaries, we have a leakiness that happens. That's normal. But we don't always take up all the fluid that leaks out. And so the lymphatic system helps by absorbing all of that, pulling up that excess fluid from between the cells, right, in the form of lymphatic fluid. And then returning, through kind of a series of vessels and whatnot, and ducts, make our way back to the cardiovascular system so we can put that fluid back in. We also are going to help with absorbing fats from the food that we eat. So lipids do not absorb directly into the bloodstream. Instead, they make their way in through the lymphatic system, where they can be broken down further and deposited, right, into the blood. And then immunity. We're not going to produce white blood cells, but we are going to have the maturation process of certain white blood cells happen in the lymphatic system. There are various sites that we have for maturation, like the thymus, but we also have various sites called lymph nodes, where we have collections of white blood cells that will filter through that lymph and remove things like debris and pathogens. Now, lymphatic vessels are different from blood vessels. They have some similarities, but there's some key differences in their structure. And so, again, it's a one-way system. We're taking that interstitial fluid and we're returning it back to the bloodstream. So we do not have blood in the lymphatic vessels, right? We have lymph in there. And so because it's the bloodstream, the cardiovascular system, those veins and capillaries, whatever, are not perfect at reabsorbing fluid, right? Fluid accumulates in the tissues. The lymphatic capillaries and vessels are going to pull up that excess fluid and then transport it and dump it back into the cardiovascular system. So if we look at the structure, we see that here's our cardiovascular capillaries in blue, purple, red, right, in this kind of mess, this little knot right here. And in green, we see the lymphatic capillaries intertwining with them, right? So wherever we find these capillaries for blood, we also see the lymphatic ones. We anchor down with collagen, right? And that we have like these little mini valves, right, that we can kind of pull that fluid up in between. Now, because we have these like highway systems, these fluids that are being pumped around, we need to make sure that fluid is kept clean, right? That debris, pathogens, things like that are kept up, right? It's always in circulation, right? Whether we're looking at blood, whether we're looking at lymph, it's constantly circulating around, right? And that we have things to help clean that up. But if we talk about how these two systems intertwine, right? We have the heart. The heart is going to pump blood through the arterial system to the capillaries, right? All the blood's going to keep moving to the venous system back to the heart. But for the fluid that does not make its way back in through the capillaries in the bloodstream is going to get pulled up by the lymphatic capillaries instead. We have these collecting vessels. We have these valves so that they move in one direction only. So we're taken up by lymphatic capillaries, we move through lymphatic vessel, we make our way to a lymphatic trunk, a duct, and then back into the bloodstream, right? And so like in the subclavian vein near the heart, we have two different ducts on either side where we can push lymph fluid back into the bloodstream. Now, the vessels are not alone. We have organs that help with the lymphatic system, and we can break them into two categories, primary and secondary. Primary are going to be kind of the ones where their main job, right, is to be part of like this immune system or be part of the lymphatic system. So like red bone marrow, this is where we're making all of our blood cells, including all of the white blood cells. And the thymus, which is where we have T cell maturation occur, right? Those are like the main jobs for those components, and so we consider those primary. Secondary, we are going to have, basically these are sites where the immune system can mount a response. So the lymph nodes, the spleen, and then specific lymphoid tissues like the Peyer's patches that we see in the GI tract, or adenoids or the tonsils as well. Now I mentioned that our bloodstream, our capillaries in the bloodstream are on the leaky side, right? Because we're making a lot of fluid exchanges. We're exchanging nutrients and gases and all that kind of stuff. But that we don't always pull up all the fluid that leaves the bloodstream, right? So fluid accumulates in between the cells, in between the tissues. And the lymphatic system is going to be what helps prevent an overflow of that fluid in between the tissues. It takes all the excessive fluid up. But if your lymphatic system is not functioning properly and it cannot pull up that extra fluid, we end up with a condition called lymphedema. Usually we see this in like an arm or a leg, and that they swell because there's so much fluid in between the cells. Either something has blocked or destroyed parts of the lymphatic drainage system. Maybe we've had surgery or radiation, or we have certain infections, right? There's different things that can cause this. If we have too much of this fluid, we actually can have inflammation that leads to permanent changes in the tissue. This can be, painful. This can be very disruptive to somebody's life, right? Because they may have harder time with mobility or using that limb. And if it's left to, its own devices, you can actually have the fluid seep through the skin.